Hey everyone, it's David Bombal. I'm here in Austin, Texas at the SolarWinds offices, and I'm really excited to introduce you to Jeremy, who's the original creator of GNS3. Jeremy, welcome to the show.
My pleasure.
So Jeremy, architecture in GNS3 is quite a complex thing. Can you kind of explain what it's about?
Of course.
Yeah.
So GNS3 has three major parts for architecture. So we have the
Get out your way.
UI part, so user interface. We have the controller component, and then we have what we call compute servers. So basically the UI talks to the controller using a REST API.
The UI is the graphical user interface that you install on your desktop.
So the UI can be the current desktop interface, or in the future the web interface. So it's like the interface to see your topologies, perform actions like start a node, stop a node, link a node with another one. So everything is done through APIs. So it means we can have multiple user interface talking to the same controller, and the controller is responsible for managing the projects. The controller has a entire view of your topologies, which node is connected to where, etc., etc. Like all the project management is done in the controller. So API. So it also means you can have scripts talking to the controller using the API. So it's very, very flexible. So the controller then talks to compute servers using an internal API. And the compute servers are the one who actually perform the emulations. So compute server will interface with emulators like Dynamips, Vmware, Virtualbox, QEMU, etc., etc. So in there we have emulator, like we can say it's a QEMU. And inside QEMU we actually run the nodes.
Yeah.
So inside QEMU you have a node here.
So like the viral images would run in that, yeah?
Yeah, in QEMU or VMware or etc., etc. So we can have nodes, like compute servers can be on different hosts, like different machines. QEMU, and we can have three nodes on three different servers. So everything is done locally here, but for the nodes to talk to each other, we use a technology called Udp Tunneling. So the controller will tell compute servers, I want this node and this node to talk to each other using Udp Tunneling. And we actually have a small component called ubridge, which is responsible to translate from one emulator technology to UDP tunnel. Like if you take VMware, you have a VMnet interface. So ubridge will take that VMnet interface and create a UDP tunnel to start the communication to the other node. So we create like a UDP tunnel between this node and this node. So ubridge will be running here and here. We have one ubridge instance per interface per node. And so we create one UDP tunnel in one direction and one UDP tunnel in the other direction to have a bi-directional communications.
Cool.
So that's how we can scale. You can have like how do you say it?
Like a really large topology, yeah?
Yeah, like a really large topology, and we don't need to use technologies like VXLAN or more
wow.
complicated things.
So UBridge is kind of doing what VXLAN would do, like creating that tunnel between different nodes. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes. Like it's simpler, but it's like really it works well.
So Jeremy, that's great. So just so that I understand, this is again the graphical user interface, which could be like the executable running on Windows.
Yeah.
So you could have like a Windows machine with a GUI, and then you could have like a Linux computer with a GUI.
Yes.
Or in the future, this could be the web UI.
It could be the web UI.
A browser, yeah.
And one interesting thing is you perform an action in this UI, like you drop an ad. It's going to appear on the other user interface.
So like in a classroom environment, you could have like 20 of these with a professor doing stuff, and then the students can see all those updates. Is that right?
Exactly, yes.
That's brilliant. And they all use a REST API talking to the controller.
Yeah, REST API, and the controller has also something called notifications.
Yeah.
It's with WebSockets.
Yeah.
So we actually can tell this node stopped working to the UI.
Oh,
so it's
I
like
see.
a bi-directional communication between the controller and the user interfaces.
So this is like a process running, is that on the VM, GNS3 VM, or where is this process?
It's part of the GNS3 server.
Okay.
So you can choose to run the GNS3 server as a controller or as a compute server.
Okay, so that could run on the GUI or on the VM, is that right?
It runs inside the VM.
Oh, inside the GNS3 VM.
Yeah, inside the GNS3 VM or locally if you don't use the VM.
Okay.
And the controller can also be the compute server if you only run one instance.
Okay. So I mean, ideally, what users should be doing is they should be running the GNS3 VM, and then the controller runs on the GNS3 VM.
Yes.
And that allows you to have multiple user interfaces to that controller.
Yes.
And whatever changes you make on one is replicated to the others.
Exactly.
Yep. And then this thing controls, the controller controls, did you say compute?
Compute servers. Yeah,
Compute servers.
Yeah, we call them compute.
And that could be like QEMU, Dynamips.
Yes, then the compute server actually interfaces with the actual emulators like Vmware, QEMU.
Oh, okay. So this could be like running on a Windows computer,
a Linux computer,
Linux, and ESXi or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay. So you've got multiple GUIs. You've got like a central brain, which is a controller.
Yeah.
And that's talking to multiple physical devices, if you want that.
Yes.
And then each of those could run QEMU or Dynamips or something like that. Is that right?
Yes, correct.
Brilliant. So it's like really scalable.
It's really flexible, and we can have like many combinations. Like we can run everything locally, or we can run everything completely separated. Like you can run the controller on one host, and compute servers on different other hosts, and it's completely disconnected.
Wow. Okay, so the GNS3 recommendation is to use the GNS3 VM, is that right?
Yes, especially on Windows.
Yeah,
because OS X.
Yeah, because I was going to ask you about that. So QEMU is basically a hypervisor that allows you to emulate like different types of devices on a PC type thing. Is that right?
Oh yes.
So it's similar logically to VMware or Virtualbox. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
But why can't this run like on a Windows PC?
Because QEMU needs something called nested virtualization.
Yeah.
And it doesn't exist on Windows. So it's like QEMU is mostly a Linux technology.
Yeah.
So you have to run QEMU on Linux to get a good speed. Like if you try it, you can run QEMU on Windows,
but only if you're
crazy.
It
would be really, really slow, especially with the latest appliances. Like huge appliances, they need lots of resources to run, and you cannot do that on Windows.
Okay, so that makes sense. So that's why you have the GNS3 VM, because you can run QEMU inside the GNS3 VM on a Windows PC.
On a Windows PC.
And that gets me to the next question. So is that why you need to have VMware rather than Virtualbox? Because you've got all of this stuff nested.
Oh yes. Like you have the VMware, and VMware supports that nested virtualization thing. So you actually run all these parts inside the VM.
Okay. Yeah.
So the controllers, compute servers, and emulators.
This could be multiple GNS3 VMs on different computers.
Could also be
like
multiple VMs. And so to run a VM within a VM,
Yeah.
so you run a QEMU appliances within the GNS3 VM.
Yeah.
The emulator like Vmware must support nested virtualization.
So is it recommended today to use Virtualbox, or would you recommend people don't use Virtualbox?
We really recommend Vmware because Virtualbox does not support nested virtualization, so you will be very limited. You can run Docker or small appliances like Dynamips.
Yeah.
But if you want to run the latest appliances from Cisco like IOSV or etc., you cannot do that with Virtualbox. So you must run in VMware.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So one of the questions guys ask is, doesn't VMware cost money?
Yes, it does. You have the VMware Workstation
Pro,
which
and that costs money, yeah?
That costs money. But you also have the VMware Workstation Player, and that does not cost money. But it's a bit less easy to install, but it works and it's free.
Okay, so ideally, if I was a Windows user, I should have VMware Workstation Pro. Is that right? Ideally.
Ideally, if you want to pay for it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you can still use a Workstation Player.
So the best options are get a VMware product, so either Workstation Pro, if you can buy that, or Workstation Player from VMware if you want a free product.
Yes.
So there's no reason you don't have to spend money basically for GNS3.
No, you don't.
Because GNS3 itself is open source,
yes.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And then you can get Player from VMware.
VMware for free.
And then the only problem is you need to get images. So like iOS image you have to get from Cisco.
Yes.
Okay. So what about ESXi? You can run this on ESXi as well, is that right?
Oh yes, just like you would do for the VM, you can run everything in ESXi.
And ESXi is free. So
ESXi is free, yes.
So you could run. So in other words, this and these components, what you've got is VM here, will all run on ESXi.
Yeah, you could just like ESXi. You can run everything in ESXi host.
And then these would be like Windows or Linux or Mac.
Yeah, anywhere where you have a network connectivity to ESXi.
So you just need IP connectivity. So this could be hosted anywhere. And that gets me to the next thing. So this could be hosted on the cloud, yeah?
Yes.
And then this would just have a tunnel to packet.net, is it?
Yes, we have this. So you can create a VPN between your local machine running the user interface to packet.net or any other provider supporting nested virtualization.
And that's an important thing. It needs to be nested virtualization.
Yeah, it needs to be nested virtualization.
So could you run it on Amazon or?
I think Amazon started to propose instances that support nested virtualization. I never tested it.
Yeah.
But in theory, it will work.
So the recommendation today is to use packet.net.
Yeah, packet.net is the one we recommend because it's bare metal, and but with easy provisioning, so you can start instances quite quickly.
Now we briefly mentioned this, but I know you guys are working on a web UI.
Yes.
So the idea is rather than having like in Windows an executable that you run locally and then you connect to the VM, all you would have is the VM and then it's just a browser. Is that right?
Yes. It would be much easier to install GNS3 because many of our users have issues like having their user interface connect to the server or the GNS3 VM, like because of antivirus blocking the network connectivity or many other issues.
Yeah, so I mean this is great because all the user would have perhaps sometime in the future is have a VM and then a browser pointing to it, and then they would control everything.
We will just distribute a VM, everything included, excepting the appliances themselves.
Yeah, so you're not legally allowed to give iOS images.
Even if you get free appliances from Arista or Cumulus, you will be too big, like the GNS3 VM would be.
That's a good point.
Too big,
Yeah, so you don't want to bundle the appliances because it would be too big.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a big thing because like Cumulus is like a gig or something just for the appliance. Very big, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I mean that's sort of perhaps next year, maybe next year, 2019. we would move to having, we'd still have this if you want that.
Yes.
And then, but if you don't want that, you would have the web UI, which is essentially just a browser.
Yeah, everything will be inside the VM.
That's great. That's brilliant. Jeremy, can you give us an idea what kind of operating systems are supported here? Like what's supported here? Just if you can like kind of list sort of what a user needs to have for this part and say this part.
So basically, user interface can be any operating system.
Yeah.
We support Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. But for the backend part, so server part, we really recommend to use Linux.
Yeah.
And that's also why we provide the GNS3 VM for our Windows users.
Okay, so that's an important point because I get asked this a lot. If I'm running Linux, do I need the GNS3 VM?
No, you don't need the GNS3 VM. You can run everything locally. But if you don't want to spend time configuring everything yourself, you can just use the GNS3 VM.
Oh, okay, so I didn't know that. So you got two options with Linux.
Yes.
You can run all of this on like a Linux PC.
Yeah.
But then you have to do some like configuration to make this all work. Is that right?
Oh, yes.
Or I can run the GUI on my Linux and then install the VM on the Linux.
And Linux, yeah.
But it's not necessary.
It's not necessary, not for Linux.
But if I'm running Windows and Mac OS, I should use the GNS3 VM.
You should use the GNS3 VM or a remote server, which is Linux.
Which is like ESXi or something like that.
Yes.
And the reason for that again is because like this is not supported on Windows.
It's mostly because of QEMU and all the recent appliances that needs to lots of resources. You need nested virtualization for them to work correctly.
Okay, so again, this on the UI side would be Windows like 10, Windows 8, 7, something like that.
Yes.
And then Mac
also,
and
or Linux.
And Linux.
Yeah.
And is there any preferred flavor of Linux? Would it be Ubuntu, or what would you recommend?
We support like Debian-based distributions like Ubuntu, Debian. Yeah.
Okay, great. So this is again so Windows, Mac, or Linux. This has to be Linux, but you make it easy by providing a VM.
Exactly.
Okay. So again, Windows, Mac, you need the VM. Linux, you have the option. So I didn't know that. I thought you didn't use it, but you can if you want to.
Oh yes. You can install everything yourself on Linux, and you don't have to worry about the VM.
So if someone's new to GNS3, do you have any tips or tricks and recommendations? Like what are the best practices you would recommend?
So when you install GNS3 on Windows, we recommend to whitelist the GNS3 in your antivirus.
So antivirus is a problem, isn't it?
Yes, antivirus is a big problem for us for GNS3 because they kind of flag us like as a potential threat, and things like the IP communication between the UI and the VM does not work. So like we have users complaining like, oh my GNS3 UI does not find the GNS3 VM or cannot communicate with the GNS3 VM, etc., etc.
Yeah, so you wouldn't recommend necessarily disabling antivirus entirely because that could expose you to viruses, obviously.
Yes.
But you need to whitelist GNS3 as an application on your antivirus.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, sort of one of the biggest issues you guys have, like complaints, is it's typically going back to antivirus, or perhaps someone doesn't have the right hardware.
Yes.
So if they whitelist GNS3 and they go into the GNS3 documentation and they look at the minimum requirements for GNS3, that will solve a lot of problems.
Also, yes, that users trying to run too much with not enough resources.
Yeah.
So that can be a problem too. They need to make sure they allocate enough memory for the VM.
Yeah.
Because if they try to run like a big topology in one gig of RAM, it's not going to work well.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point.
Be extremely slow.
Because the QEMU devices would need like 500 meg for one.
Yes.
And if you run 10 of those and you've only got 2 gig or whatever for your whole VM, it's not going to work.
No, it's going to be extremely slow.
And from a processor point of view, if I understand right, and correct me if I'm wrong, is like if you run iOS V, which is a viral image, you're running one operating system within QEMU, which is running within Linux,
Yes.
which is running within VMware Workstation, say, which is running on Windows. So you've got all these nested
layers, and if you need a good hardware for that to run smoothly.
Yeah, so if you haven't got a good machine, could you still use Dynamips?
You can still use Dynamips, yes.
And the advantage of Dynamips is you can run it on this,
Oh yeah,
on
you
the
can
UI
run everything
locally.
You don't need a VM. But of course you cannot use all the recent viral images.
And I mean, that gets to another thing, because a lot of guys think that GNS3 doesn't support switching, but it does if you've got a viral image. So you get iOS V layer 2, you can do like almost all the switching stuff.
Yeah, 90% or a bit more.
Yeah, but the thing to remember about that is you need to run it on the VM, because you need QEMU, and you need decent resources.
Yes, you need recent computers with the CPU supporting nested virtualization.
Oh, that's a good point. So the actual hardware on your laptop or your PC needs to support VTX?
VTX for Intel CPUs, or AMD V for AMD processors.
So they have to, if it's not enabled, they have to go into the BIOS of their
Yes, they
computers.
have to. Usually, I think it's enabled by default, but they need to make sure it's enabled in the BIOS of the computer.
So I mean, that's happened to me. So if you boot up the GNS3 VM, does it give you a warning?
Usually, the VMware will give you a warning if you try to enable nested virtualization, and you try to power on the VM.
Okay, so VMware will give you a message saying that nested virtualization is not enabled.
not supported or something.
Okay, great, great. That's brilliant, Jeremy. Thanks so much for spending some time with me. Everyone, I just want to say thanks for watching, and thanks to Jeremy for firstly creating GNS3, and secondly for spending some time with us explaining the GNS3 architecture. Thanks, Jeremy.
No problem.